because we choose to practice sometimes at a higher standard. And meeting Drew, he's not only at the higher standard, he is setting the utmost bar for luxury in San Diego and also in 30A Rosemary Beach. So for those of you on the call who've got clients who summer in 30A, who vacation there, that is the hot spot for West U and spring break. So Drew is our go-to referral source, both in Rosemary, 30A, and San Diego. So he's been in the business for a minute, leads an incredible luxury team. And what we loved so much about Drew is that his tagline is relationships first, then real estate. And for those of you on this call, that's very much in the vein of how we operate. So what I wanted to bring Drew on is to talk about something that we have not yet done, and it's where we're going. You all know that our forms are changing to allow for us to have additional compensation for unrepresented buyers. And that's sort of new territory for us. Drew's already done that, is leading the charge, and knows exactly what to say, both to the sellers for that to be an easy buy-in conversation, and then also for the buyers who are coming to you unrepresented and may need some assistance. So with that, Drew, I'm going to let you kind of take over, but tell us, start with like point A, what is the conversation with your sellers regarding how you charge for unrepresented buyers?
For sure. We'll make it really simple. So when we're talking with a seller, I'll give you the dialogue first, and then maybe we'll go back and we'll dissect it a little bit. Actually, I'm going to recant that. Let's create a framework for where we're going so that then you all can really easily map it into the framework. So we want to really deal with this from, I'll say, the grow model of a conversation. So we've got the goal, the reality, the obstacles, and the way forward. Now, this isn't really a conversation where there's necessarily a goal, but I want you to think of the conversational flow in that way because it'll allow you to communicate it in a way that's effective and clean and easy. So the goal here for the seller is that they sell the property for the highest price possible and the highest net to them and have the best possible experience. And the reality of the situation is that we're going to have buyers that come to us, Mr. Seller, that are going to say, I don't have an agent and I want to get a great deal and I'm going to offer you a lower price. And the challenges that come along with that are that then when we're working with a buyer who's unrepresented, Mr. Seller, they don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. We then, as the listing agent, essentially are supporting them as their agent, except not having agency. And the real challenge that that's going to create, Mr. Seller, is that then when we've got an unrepresented buyer that we're working with, that ultimately they are going to run us around at the other end of our whip. We don't want that. Our goal is to work for you and to get the property sold for the highest net in the least amount of time. And so then given that we're going to have buyers that are going to come to us and are going to say to us, we want to work directly with the listing agent and be unrepresented to save money, we want to discourage that behavior. And we want to make sure that if they do want to do that behavior, that our team can support you through that. So while our fee, I'm going to take an example, our fee on the listing side, Mr. Seller, is going to be 2.5% to represent you. In the event that we get a wayward buyer who really wants to try to do this with us, we're going to ask that you compensate us an additional 2% for that representation. Does that work for you? And I think that that's the flow of the conversation with the seller. Been very effective with that. By the way, you're going to get a copy of the recording so that you can work on that. But before we go on, let's just ask, so what questions do you have about the way that I approach that dialogue?
Quiet group. I know you got some
Great.
questions. Right? How many of you are just actually afraid to have that conversation? right? What are the objections? Violet, you're shaking your head. What are the objections that you're afraid that the seller will say that are running around in your head right now?
Good. Yeah. Yeah. Let's hear those. What are some of the objections that a seller is going to have? And then we can hear how I might respond to them.
So, hello, by the way, I'm Violet.
Hey, Violet, how are you?
I think one of my initial, and I've had the conversations with sellers before and it's gone smoothly, but I think my initial gut reaction is, or fear is that a seller is going to say, well, in that case, what if we lose that buyer? Are you not willing to make the deal work for your initial 2.5%?
I would then respond and I would say more about what you mean by if we would lose that buyer, because there's no buyer to be lost here. Tell me what you mean by that. And what do you mean by that, Violet?
So if we were in that situation and the buyer wanted to save 3% and that was the only way they were going to make the deal work.
Well, here's the good news, Violet. Violet, I'm going to talk to you like you're the seller bringing me this objection. So Violet, here's the really good news. See, when we put this protection in place, called that there's compensation to our office in the event that a buyer wants to come unrepresented, what we actually get is a mechanism to send the buyer to go and find an agent to represent them, or to have an agent perhaps on our team to represent them. Because at the end of the day, Violet, you know how this works. A buyer is going to come to us on the market and they're going to say, I love the home. I want to pay full price and I want you to help me pay my agent. We know that that's not going anywhere. You're going to have to make a concession to help the buyer pay for their agent unless this buyer has a bunch of cash, right? We can all agree that that's the case. Okay, so then the question is that buyer better off having an agent that is in with them or that's on the outside of them from your vantage point? See, because I can do a lot more for you when either somebody on my team or myself is representing the buyer, because then there's trust that gets created. So we don't want to create a situation where the buyer is unrepresented, because then they don't trust anyone and we don't have visibility into what's happening and we can't steward the transaction to close.
I like that a lot. I wish I could take notes fast enough.
It's okay. You're going to get the recording.
I'll rewatch it. Yep.
Yeah. So the principle to remember here is that we have to understand, why does a seller want a buyer to be represented? And why is it worth it for a seller to actually compensate for the buyer to be represented? Or in this case, for an unrepresented buyer, which is a really backdoor way. I'm just going to say it plainly. So where we're going here is actually the conversation to have as a buyer's agent on the team, and how to parlay this unrepresented compensation into, of course, you're going to want to work with me. There's no reason why you wouldn't, because our office is going to get paid either way. So why wouldn't you want a fiduciary on your side? Somebody who's representing you. So we'll get there. I didn't mean to give that one away, but see, from the seller's vantage point, this compensation discourages bad transactions. That's the intention here, is we're saying, Mr. Buyer, you're not going to give us a shitty transaction, because we're going to pay our agent even if you want to be unrepresented. So that's cost that's built in. Nobody's saving any money here. Nobody's getting any special deals. It discourages that kind of thinking on behalf of a buyer. And then they have to then choose an agent, whether that's somebody they know or perhaps somebody else on the team who's a buyer's agent. And so that then the team can collect that revenue, control the buyer, ensure success for the seller. That's really what this is all about. Does that make sense, Violet? Does that give you some confidence in how to respond to that objection?
Yes. I need to practice it a couple times, but yeah, came out great when you said it.
Yeah, and I mean, you got to say, this is all about a lot of practice, a lot of role play. Before I go into a listing appointment, y'all, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've gone on a lot of listing appointments. Okay. I'm not saying that I'm the expert. I'm going to share with you a dirty little secret. Before nearly every listing appointment, I call somebody who plays at my level and I practice the objections that I'm worried I'm going to get. I
Mm,
spend just 5-10 minutes on the phone. It's been
mhm,
part of my routine for 15 years. I'm never going to give it up because
mhm.
you never fully master a conversation. And that 10 minutes will set you free in the
Mhm.
interaction with the seller so that you can just be totally present, and it's like you're like bulletproof. Bring it on. What kind of concerns you got? Give me your objections. Come on, I'm ready for them.
You're ready.
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
Cool. Okay,
Thank
Drew,
what
you.
else?
do you ever go into it with like statistics of these unrepresented buyers? This is the percentage that will fall out of contract because they've not had the proper representation to talk them through that inspection report that has 50 pages or anything like that.
I think that's a great idea. And I think depending on the seller that you're at the table with, if they're someone who you can tell is motivated by statistics, you might offer them that piece of information.
Courtney, I
Yeah.
think you've got something.
Yeah, I love the the language that you said, a special deal. Do you incorporate that in the conversation when you're talking with them about unrepresented buyer? Because I just went through this and my clients kept saying, just tell her, don't respond to her emails, don't respond at all. And I'm like, I do have to respond to her, at least have to give her something, like either it's go buzz off or whatever it may be. But do you use the language like a special deal to imply that that person feels that they are privileged over anyone else because they're unrepresented?
So I'm trying, give me a specific on the court example of where I might and might not use that. I want to make sure I'm addressing the consideration that you have. In what practical application?
Maybe in the conversation with the seller to explain why you wouldn't want an unrepresented buyer. Maybe explaining that my experience with unrepresented buyers is that they do feel they are special or above because they can handle it themselves, they think, and it's usually a disaster. So maybe using the word special deal and explaining that to them.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. By the way, I think you should listen to the way that you just said that. I think that was really brilliantly communicated.
Thank you.
If I were in a conversation with the seller, I might say, Courtney, may I be honest with you about how this could go if we have an unrepresented buyer? Generally, in those instances, our transaction is wrought with stress and very difficult. In short, it's a disaster. And so what we want to do here is we want to disincentivize an unrepresented buyer from being unrepresented. We want to eliminate the concept of that they get some special deal by being unrepresented, so that then when they call me and they say, okay, I want to write an offer on 123 Main Street and I'm unrepresented, I get to tell them, well, let's have a conversation about this unrepresented phenomenon here, because you're not going to get any kind of special deal out of my seller. They've already agreed to pay me in the event that you're unrepresented. Wouldn't it be better if you talked to a buyer specialist on our team and had someone who was your fiduciary, since you're going to pay the same price for the house and or get the same credit? So how about instead of I get paid twice, we bring in a buyer specialist and they get that compensation, and then you have a fiduciary. Sound good? And by the way, I would share that dialogue, right? If Courtney were my seller, I would go right through that so that the seller sees how I'm going to handle it and how I'm going to pitch it to their advantage. There's full transparency. They want to understand that it's in their best interest that the buyer is represented. And if that means that they need to pay for the buyer to be represented 2%, that's what that means. Because then the transaction is going to close.
Yep.
That helpful?
Yeah.
Paige, is this what you're hoping for?
Oh my gosh, it's beyond what I was hoping for. I mean, everybody wants Drew to sit in their like little shoulder and talk in their ear all day long, right? I mean, this is who Drew is. Let's switch and talk about, okay, you've had the conversation with the seller. Now let's go deep into what you're saying when that buyer says, I want to be unrepresented because I'm going to get a better deal.
Yeah. So one of the first things I ask, so when I work with when there's a buyer in front of me, or when there's a buyer in front of one of my agents, I really coach them to work. Again, I'm big in models. So we want to have that conversation from the spaces of, if you've heard of the 4 C's conversational model: care, curiosity, consult, close. It sounds like this. So Paige, how about you just be the buyer for me? Okay. All right. So Paige, I know we just met, we're perfect strangers, but one of the things about this conversation that I just want to start with is that I just ultimately really care about everybody that I have an opportunity to talk to. And I want you to really understand what this is going to look like for you, how this is going to go. So can we start there?
Sure, that sounds reasonable.
Great. Cool. Okay. So I'm curious, why do you believe that ultimately you're going to get a better deal if you're unrepresented? Just talk to me about that. Just be real with me.
Well, I mean, it seems obvious that it allows the seller to save some money. And if the seller can save some money, then they're more interested in taking my deal. And then I also get a better deal as a part of it because I'm saving money too.
I love that. Yeah, listen, makes perfect sense, right? Here's the thing. Would it surprise you to learn that in almost every listing agreement, and particularly, by the way, in the listing agreement for this property that you're interested in, there's actually compensation that's already built in that's going to get paid to the listing agent in the event that there's an unrepresented buyer.
Really?
Yeah. So there's no discount to be had here. So what I'm going to share with you is that what it might be in your best interest then is, see, you're going to pay the same price for the home, whether you're represented or unrepresented. I think in that case, would it support you to talk to an agent on our team who could then represent your interests and guide you through this, instead of just having our whole team be like working against you throughout the process? Would that support you?
Yeah, it would. But wait, so it means that the seller's not really saving any money and I'm not getting a better deal because I'm unrepresented?
Not a dime.
Guys, is that brilliant?
Yeah.
Everybody loves this, right? When Drew laid this down at a happy hour, I was like, okay, this is magic.
Yeah. Just so you know, by the way, when I discovered the truth of that, I'm going to call it a paradox, right? I don't know if it's actually a paradox, but in my brain it is. It really unlocked a lot of doors. By the way, it's what actually had me see the true correlation between why would a seller want a buyer to be represented? Because it ensures that the buyer closes. So back to that seller conversation, but from the buyer's perspective now, you can see that if your team is successful on the listing side in securing the unrepresented compensation, it's a guarantee, a near guarantee, unless you have a very difficult seller who tries to renegotiate their listing agreement in the middle of the negotiation, which can happen. But it's a damn near guarantee that then your team will receive not just the listing agency compensation, but then at least that unsecured buyer representation, and be able to represent the buyer, be able to steward the transaction close, be able to add that buyer to your database and secure future referral and repeat business from that buyer, because now you've created an advocate and not an adversary.
And guys, look, Drew's practicing this at the luxury level, right? So this is a conversation. Some of us get fearful that I can't have this conversation at the luxury level because they're smarter or they have more money and they understand things differently. And the reality is this is a conversation for any of your buyers and any of your sellers.
How do you handle, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Hi, how do you handle that conversation once you're in the contract and they want to renegotiate the commission, that 2% because of repairs, or now they're not netting as much and they feel like you've already kind of done what they've hired you to do?
Gotcha. Okay. So the scenario is, we're the listing agent and we're under contract. We're either representing the buyer or we're not. Let's just take the case that it's irrelevant to what you're saying. And actually, let's apply it to what we're dealing with here. Another agent or we are representing the buyer, and that compensation is something that's almost equivalent to or equivalent to our listing agent compensation. 2.5 on the listing side, 2% on the buyer side, something like that, right? Whatever you guys do in your market, don't care. So seller comes to me and says, Drew, so I know we agreed to this whole 4.5% deal on the front end with the unrepresented buyer, and now an agent on your team's representing the buyer. But here's the thing: that agent on the team is working against me because now they want the money for the roof and da 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 da, and they want 40 grand. I just don't know that this is a fair deal for me. That's the conversation you want to deal with. Yeah, good. So again, I would map that conversation inside of the 4 C's. So I would say to them, Lisa. So Lisa, if you're the seller, I would say, Lisa, gosh, first of all, I really appreciate you bringing that to me and not trying to sweep that under the rug and just being open and honest with me. Because obviously I really care about us having a really quality relationship and this going well, and you really singing my praises from the hilltops when we're all done here, right? That's the baseline for this. Could I just ask you a question, Lisa, about this whole repair consideration? So is your thought that if another agent were representing the buyer, that we might be dealing with a better repair outcome than what we might deal with here? If we set the agent fees aside, is your thought that if there was another buyer represented by another agent, you might be dealing with a lesser repair negotiation? Just share with me what you're thinking.
Exactly. So yes, I think that if they weren't represented, then they may not have known to go and get some of these quotes or how to negotiate some of this, or to have these additional inspections that have now found more things wrong with my house.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Well, I can appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you, have you had any experience in this before? Are there friends that have gone through this? Like, where's that thought process coming from? Again, I'm not trying to disagree with you. I just want to understand.
It just seems that
This kind of seems like that might be the way it is.
I guess I'm not sure what you're asking. Can you ask it again?
Well, pause the interaction, everybody. So the reason why I asked that question is because the seller is bringing conjecture. When a seller or a buyer brings conjecture to a situation, speculation, in other words, we want to, in a very polite way, ask them to reveal that they actually have zero idea what they're talking about and they're completely making something up, right? We don't know that that's the case. So how we do that is we say, well, let me just ask you, so can I just ask you just for real, like, where's that coming from? Do we really believe that a buyer would simply get a home inspection and then be like, oh, that all sounds great? Because
yes.
Okay, yeah, totally. Well, what I'm here to share yeah, well, what I'm here to share with you is that this buyer is pretty darn intelligent. We've had several conversations with them, and ultimately I believe that with the negotiation that's on the table, you'll recall, so what we sent over was that there was $40,000 worth of repairs that ultimately were viable repairs. And the buyer's agent in this case actually brought a repair request that was already mitigated. I'm not saying that you should agree to all that. We're going to work hard to now go in and negotiate the best possible outcome for you. But I think with candor, I would offer you that one of the reasons why we're here and not at $40,000 is because the buyer is represented. Because we've got somebody who's working and motivated. They get paid when the deal closes, not when the deal blows up.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And
I think that last piece is a really good conversation to remind our clients of. Agents get paid, and I just say it plainly like that. Remember, we all get paid when this deal closes. So if you want to blow it up and you want to give me the motivation to go back to the other side and say, hell no, do that. Do that. That would really empower me. Let me go back to the other side and say, hell no, you get nothing. And we'll see where that goes. I only get paid when it closes. I'm here to work for you.
So brilliant.
I think that's
And
changing. Oh, sorry.
yeah, and I'll just say one more thing, Lisa. I think when you remind the client of that in the same moment, because remember, the thing that they're not distinguishing is, are these people working for me? That's their real concern. Is this person really working for me, or are they working for themselves? So you got to put it back in their plate, the option of, tell me the answer is no. I'll go back and tell them they want $30,000. They get $3,000. That's it. Bye-bye.
I love that 100%. So thank you so much. That's just brilliant. I love all
Does
the
that help?
power. I love the emotion to go back to them. And it builds that confidence of who you're working for and that you're on their side, whether it's today or 6 months down the road because they blew up the deal.
Great.
I
Perfect.
had a quick question about how do you handle when you've brought that to the buyer's attention about it's best for them to have a fiduciary, and then they may go decide, I'm going to find another agent completely out of your team and everything. Like, let's say you've been offering a cooperative compensation at a higher level for if an agent brings a buyer to the table versus the 2% that you're talking about, if I basically assign an agent for my team to be your agent. So what do you do in that scenario where they've now gone and found another agent?
Well, that's great. That's a great question. Because remember, let's go back to the principle of all of this, which is that commissions are negotiable between a principal and their agent. So in this case, if that client, that principal, goes and selects another agent to be their buyer representative, they can agree on whatever fee arrangement they want. And then you, as the listing agent, you don't have to agree to pay their fee. They can send over whatever fee arrangement that they want attached to the offer. Let's just say that the conversation was, by the way, this is, Paige, if I can go here. I don't know how you guys want to handle this, but I think the way that we're handling those conversations when agents call our office and say, how much are you paying? Our answer is something like, well, gosh, first of all, thanks for your interest. I want to assure you that with an appropriate offer, our seller is absolutely prepared to pay a reasonable fee to support your client in paying your fee. We're not going to negotiate that right now. You should submit an offer and then we'll negotiate that.
Yeah, and guys, I think that's where it's going to go for us versus having commission discussions versus concessions. I mean, that is exactly where it goes. And that is exactly the language that we all need to master, because then it opens the door on the other side for them to feel okay and safe to do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
We've got 2 minutes left, so I want to be judicious with Drew's time. But that, Drew, I think that's exactly where it needs to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And obviously there's a lot of nuances there. What other questions do you have? Last minute sort of, yeah buts, how abouts, what ifs? I have 1 minute I can answer them in.
Courtney's got something.
So I just wanted to go back to the whole conversation with Lisa. So it sounds like you spin the buyer's agent for the unrepresented buyer, the new buyer's agent, to be, this is something that you've handed to them. And so their incentive is to get it to the finish line. It's kind of a bad spin in a way, like not a bad spin, but it's a creative spin in a way to help the seller understand that they are also working for you, although it may not feel like it.
Exactly. And however you want to say that, you want to say that. Yeah. This buyer's agent who's now representing this buyer, whose team are they on? Who sends them leads? Who are they really working for? Let's be honest here.
So good. So good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We're here at 10:30. Was Drew fabulous or what?
So fabulous. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you. This was transformational. We love you.
Good.
Again, San Diego 30A, he's our partner. So we really thank you for pouring into our team this morning. We know that there's lots of other things you could have done today at 10 o'clock, and we appreciate you being here. Wow, you're
I'm
the
so appreciative of the opportunity. Thank you for the invitation. You guys are all really, really excellent. Those were great questions. I'll come back anytime you'd like. And I'll send you all an email with a copy of this recording. And anytime you're at the beach, feel free to drop me a note and I'll take you to the beach club. It'll be fun.
Well, you might just have a whole caravan of us driving
That'd be
over.
fine.
We could be, y'all, we could be there by happy hour if we start now.
That'd be fine. Come on, do it. Let's go. I've
Drew,
got no
famous last
plans.
words. Famous last words.
Let's go.
Okay.
Very
Great meeting you
fun.
all.
Thank you
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you, Drew.